Hey everyone, Andrew here, and just wanted to say if you're here listening to the show, there's a good chance you're finding the discussions helpful. But regardless of how helpful the discussions may be on the show or any other content you think is helpful, sometimes it can make all the difference if you have a guide that helps you with what you're doing and how you're taking action. Whether you're uncertain of how to approach your specific challenges, building processes to create more awareness, or just wanting to optimize your current efforts, having a guide that understands your needs can help you find solutions to problems that keep you up at night. Look, I love helpful content and do my best to apply it in ways to help me grow the podcast and my business. But I also know for a fact that navigating some challenges alone or even with a team can be a daunting task filled with uncertainty. It's also the reason why I have my own guides to help me on my journey. So if you feel that you're struggling with anything in yours or feeling uncertain about how to tackle your challenges, let's chat. I'm always happy to learn more about you, especially my listeners. So if you're up for a chat, please visit rengenmarketing.com and click on Let's Chat in the navigation menu. At the very least, my goal is to get to know you a little so I can help guide you in the right direction. So thanks again for being such great listeners, and let's get right to the show. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm your host today, and we're going to be talking about maximizing PR campaigns using data insights. So creating effective PR campaigns is a very tedious process. On top of that, executing campaigns doesn't guarantee results. However, developing a better understanding and streamlining the process can create lots of opportunities to communicate your story and maximize your game's awareness. We'll be discussing how using data insights can help make decisions on how and when to execute effective PR campaigns, but also how this information can be leveraged to support all marketing efforts, giving you more confidence and control. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everyone, and we're back. And today with us, I have Gai Ning. Gai, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. So for those of you who don't know, Gai is the Sales and Business Development Manager at ICO Partners. And some of you may be familiar with ICO Partners. They have a lot of expertise in communications, business, intelligence, and marketing. They do a lot of cool things, have helped out a lot of different indie games and other projects too. Those projects range from like games as a service to crowdfunding, so many different things that they do on that front. And Gai is actually leading the efforts behind Footprints, which is a really cool program software that basically helps monitor PR activities and everything. I'm sure Gai is going to share a little bit more insight with us on that program, but also other things as well too, as why we're here to talk. And also, just another thing to call about ICO and kind of the team that Gai is part of. I mean, they worked with notable brands too, such as Blizzard, Shiro Games, Paradox. So from indies to bigger ones to just bigger entities as a whole, they have been doing a lot of cool things. And Gai is gracious enough to give us some of her time to talk about some of the things that they do and really cool things as it relates to our topic today. And yes, her role is sales and business development with the company, but she's really taking a lead on this program called Footprints. And actually, if you don't mind, could you give us just a quick snapshot of what Footprints is? Because it relates a lot to what we're talking about today, too.
So Footprints is basically a tool that video games professionals can use to help them gather coverage on a project. That can be a game, an event or something. And they can just type the name of the event or the games and get all the coverage that has been on the internet lately. We pre-filter the results. So you're basically all going to get video games results.
That's really cool because it's like, if anybody of you are familiar with like the whole press and PR process in terms of finding influencers and press and all that stuff, it can be a very tedious project, or you have to have a lot of different connections. There's just so many different layers to this, and this tool, and I've actually seen it firsthand. This tool is really cool and effective in what it can do to monitor those results, give insights, and also, just make life a lot easier. But anyways, so that's what that tool is. But it goes without saying to kind of share some of those elements of it, because again, that's what we're going to be talking about in a moment. But before we do that, a couple things. One, I'm just really curious, outside of all this cool stuff that you're doing at iEqual Partners, what are kind of some quick, what's a hobby that you do when you have some free time?
When I have some free time, I do play video games, of course. I don't have a genre that I prefer, but recently I'm mostly playing strategy and simulation games. But otherwise, I like cooking a lot. I've been cooking a lot of Chinese food lately. I draw a lot too, but I'm not comfortable to share anything yet. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I do read sometimes. I do study a bit of industry and how it works and everything like that. But yeah.
You know what? I can definitely relate to some of that, because I have found that I have mastered what I call Chinese chicken, which is generally like General Tso's chicken, gluten-free version. And I've gotten it to the point where the kids prefer that over our local favorite Chinese restaurant. And I've done the same thing with my fried rice. So at any rate, we might have to share some recipes at some point. But anyways, no, that's really cool. Like playing video games and really honing in on your cooking skills sounds really cool too. And in light of all that stuff, Guy, I would love to learn a little bit more as we approach the Q-Box round. And again, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's just a series of random questions I have here for Guy. And are you ready for the Q-Box round?
Let's do it.
I love it. All right. So what's your main approach to tackling problems?
Okay, so I throw myself in the problem. But more seriously, most of the time I try to find what's the key blocker in the problems. So do I need a green light for someone? Is it a technical issue? Is it something that's supposed to be on my end and I forgot? Depending on the reply, I try to find the right person to unblock the situation, and I learn for next time. But then it's a very logical approach on my end, and I do understand that it doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah, but I think that's such a great explanation on how you would do it, but also understanding like, hey, it might not always work. So I love that. All right, next. What's your favorite, most helpful mobile app?
Helpful mobile app. Okay, it's going maybe to sound weird, but I think it's the Wikipedia app.
Ah, okay.
Because I tend to be the kind of person who search for everything they don't know. So the thing is, Wikipedia is super handy for that. I just write down what I don't know, read the blog, and okay, I know it now. So I can approach a subject with that.
Awesome. I love it. And last but not least here on the show, staple here on the show is, what game are you playing right now?
Okay, it's going to be, I think, two extremes. But I'm playing Darkest Dungeon 2. And at the same time, I'm playing Coral Island.
Oh, okay.
Or Stardew Valley. Sometimes I switch, but I do play a lot of farming games.
They are fun and relaxing. So
yes,
can't give. No, that is quite a extreme. But hey, like you said, you like playing lots of different games. You're not a one type gamer. You're all over the place, which is I think is great. Like it doesn't matter. Whatever you play is always fun. Whatever anybody plays is always great. So as long as you're making time for it, I need to make more time for games. But anyways, good games right there. Well, Guy, I really appreciate you sharing a little bit more about yourself. And before we get into the discussion, I completely forgot earlier, folks, but Guy does have a really great offer that she's going to extend, but please stick around to the end and you can find out what that offer is. But with that in mind and everything else that we're here for, let's get into the meat of the conversation. Again, we're talking about maximizing PR campaigns using data insights. Because again, we talked about some of the problems before, but this is one of them. Like, how do you really get these insights? And so we're going to dive in further with that. And by doing so, we're going to kick off with saying just, right now, I would say there's a good general consensus where everyone seems to have a different idea or definition of what PR is. I've seen this word get tossed around so many times, right? And I'm sure you have too. But I'm just curious, would you mind just quickly giving your own breakdown of what it consists of? What is PR? What's your breakdown?
Okay, so PR for me is managing and spreading information from your company on person you represent to the public. It's through different means, but oftentimes media outlets. And it's supposed to shape how others see and feel about the brand, the product, or someone even. I would say it's done by maintaining a specific image, handling media request inquiries, and unfortunately, sometimes is to help in damage control when and if it comes to it.
Okay. No, that is a really good, simple breakdown of it, because again, I think sometimes our how people envision this is very specific to one thing or another thing, but how you defined everything was really holistic. But also bigger picture type stuff like brands and how are you represented outside of simply just getting awareness on and getting that coverage. There's a lot more that goes into PR than what I think a lot of us may think of it. So I think that's really interesting. And I want to kind of dive into some of that a little bit further because it sounds like there's a lot of other important elements related to PR other than just focusing on the game, right? So I want to talk a little bit more about the game, but also as a brand too. But first, here's one I think that comes up a lot. There's a lot of conversation about how PR may not be as effective as it used to be in creating awareness for games. So with that said, why would you think that PR is still important for games and brands to consider as part of their marketing strategy?
So I think PR should be part of a marketing strategy because journalists are still in the gaming industry very big. It's a big part of it. So there will be a sort of beacon that would make your game shine. So you will have to focus on PR at some point. Also, it lets you manage the information you're giving the press with the right tone and what you want to convey from it, which can be very important depending on the game. Let's take the two games we talked about just earlier. Darkest Dungeon 2, you're not going to send PR communication in the same way you do with Coral Island.
Right, yes.
So yeah, it's very important to tailor-make your communication in PR, and that's a big point in communication. So otherwise, having a PR person makes that the press will have a point of contact if they need it. So you can clear up speculations, misunderstandings, and really be on point on how and what you want to communicate.
That's a really good point too, because I think sometimes we look at this as very narrow-minded, right? We might not be getting as great results from this type of effort, or we've heard stories or whatever. But again, it's the holistic approach. And also, I think there's part of that process, what you outlined very well in terms of communication and how having effective communication can kind of make or break a campaign too. Just because you're getting covered from X, Y, or Z, if the communication isn't in line with everything else that you're communicating from other visuals that you're sharing on, social media all the way down to the gameplay, then there's a break in that chain, or it can cause some friction or whatever the case may be. So I really like how you phrase that with saying, communication is really a key part. And it goes both ways for not just the game, but also the brand too. And there's a lot of other factors that can come into play with that as well. So I like that you did that. Now, with that said, as kind of a follow-up question though, is do you feel that, part of this thinking could also, because you alluded this a little bit in I think your response, but do you think part of this thinking could derive from some of the processes used or even the costs of executing an effective PR campaign.
Yes. But even though PR campaigns do have a cost and a lot of companies try to cut it off to focus on a sort of very general kind of marketing, keeping PR is very important because let's say that marketing shows the game, but the PR campaign specifically creates a story to push it to the correct player base. There's a genuine link that can be made through PR that you can have on, say, a trailer on YouTube, even though that trailer has 5 million views.
Yeah, exactly. And what I loved about what you just said there, like, can really encapsulate that, is the point you made by just creating a story. PR allows you to create a story, whereas in other formats you can, but it could be in like bite-sized pieces and hard to put that story to really convey what that story is. Not always, but it can be a process. But especially depending, like you said, how is creating that story really aligning with your audience and everything else? And yeah. I really like how that's an important part. But yeah, like short answer was, like you said, yes. I mean, cost can be a factor. It could be really tedious. There could be so many other factors. And at the end of the day, it's like, oh, this isn't as effective because of maybe we didn't know how to do this. Maybe the right things weren't done. Who knows? There's a lot of variable factors. But
yes. Like a colleague told me, marketing is putting the product on a shelf, but PR is getting people to stop in front of that shelf to get the product.
Ah, I love that analogy. That's a really good one. So smart words right there. Good words. Cool. All right. Well, we covered some things in terms of how, the importance of PR, how it can affect your, game and brand as a whole too, from telling that story, that communication, everything. I want to kind of dive in deep, not necessarily specific numbers, because it's hard to talk about numbers all the time, but without anything to show for it. But I want to kind of talk about like leveling market efforts using PR data insights, or leveling up marketing efforts. Sorry, folks. Using data insights, especially with PR campaigns. Because again, these are all the kind of things that can be hard to track and attribute and all this stuff. So leading with that, I think all of us here can agree that finding the right kind of coverage is a key component for effective PR campaigns, but can also be a challenge to identify those opportunities, right? I mean, that's part of the tedious nature of this particular field. But with that said, what would you say are some great ways to identify opportunities that are a good fit? And do you have any ideas on how to approach them if no prior relationship is established? So what are some great ways to identify opportunities and take advantage of them?
Okay, so first of all, LinkedIn and BizDev tools such as Hunter or Upwork are your friends. But more seriously, you need to approach the press as people. You drop a short, friendly email with a brief introduction of who you are, who you represent, and what you'd like to discuss. For example, a reveal, an exclusive asset, a review code, because chances are that these people, they have a ton of emails per day. So it's better to keep it polite, but very short and very straight to the point to catch their attention.
Okay, so reaching out to these individuals and everything else, and keeping it short and sweet, but more importantly, just approaching them as people, knowing that, hey, they're busy. There's a lot of things going on. I got to be getting right to the point with this stuff. So definitely great ways to approach them. But let's say if I'm approaching this from a perspective of like, hey, I really don't necessarily know who to reach out to. But I know, hey, there's this game out over here that's very similar to our games, and they got some coverage. Like, what are some things that we could use to kind of like find those opportunities, whether it's a site that already covered a game like ours, or is that one way to go about it? Like, how do we go about searching for more of these opportunities, or what are some process or things that we could look for?
I think you can watch what your competitors are doing and where they are getting coverage from. And from that, you can try to build some connection with the outlets. Like you can approach them saying, oh, I see that you've covered X on Y or Z, and tell them that you have something that's quite similar, but not really, and you'd like to discuss that. But again, straight to the point. I have a game that's similar to X. I see that you do coverage for that kind of game. Here are what the main, I would say, USP of that game, and you can see how where it goes. But yeah, the only issue you can have actually is just that as an indie game developer, you might not have that influence, but it's worth a try. Like, I'm going to say it later, but you have to be prepared to get ignored at some point.
Yes, rejection is going to be a common thing. And if I remember correctly, and this is a very generalized statement for just about anything with outreach in general, plan on 5 to probably 2%. So every 100 emails you write, reaching out, only 2 to 5 of them are going to get back to you, right? But back to what you said, and again, you mentioned how, hey, it might be harder being a new dev, a new studio, first title, to get that. But I think the principles you outlined are really good, saying like, hey, look, you basically said, hey, do some competitor research, see what other games like yours are doing. And then also, like, if you have a good understanding of what those games are doing, that could give you a good position to stand and be like, hey, you cover this, but here is my differentiator and why you would probably want to cover this. I love that approach because basically it's saying, yes, I identify, hey, these types of games you cover are in your wheelhouse. It's your jive, cool. But now you're saying, but we do this. And it's like everything else you covered doesn't do that. And so I love how you position things that way, because then it can pique their interest. And if it's piquing their interest, folks, that also means it's piquing the reader interest. Because at the end of the day, their goal is to get eyeballs, to have people read this. Because if they get more traffic, they get more ad revenue and everything else. And that's really the way to go. So that's why I love how you set up that persistence, because it's like, hey, we're pitching these things. We got to stand out somehow. And those are some great examples. So thank you for sharing those. So with that said, I have another kind of off question here. How important is relationships? And I mean this specifically, already established relationships versus not having any relationships with anybody in PR. Like, is it super important, or does it just make things a little bit easier?
Having relationships in PR will help you a lot, because you can have you have a direct line with someone who's going to talk about your game. So you're just going to drop a message. They know who you are. They already know all the things that you did before, so they don't have to do that research too. So it's sometimes safe for them too. So it's going to be quicker, more efficient, and you can share your story more easily that way. But the thing is, building a relationship takes time,
right?
And you have to take that time to build that, because it's going to be important at some point if you really want to go into PR and doing campaigns.
Yeah. And again, it's like kind of one of those situations, but I think it just really boils down to time. Like, how valuable is your time at this moment, wherever you are on your journey? And then much later, how valuable is your time? So when people are probably thinking about, like, do I get an expert to help me with this or not, or whatever, it really comes down to the whole time factor, resources, and everything else. But very, very good points there, because I think that's another one people always kind of struggle with. But let's see. Let's kind of go into some other areas here too, because I'm curious in terms of when you're creating, like, let's call it effective PR campaigns. Quality can definitely outweigh quantity. So with that in mind, what are good ways to make the distinction, especially if certain coverage outlets are out of reach?
It's going to touch a bit what we said earlier, but outreaching directly to some outlets can really make a difference. It's going to be more time consuming, but you will have the chance to have a very personalized exchange with the chosen outlets, get to know them and how they work. And that quality will definitely help in getting more attention than a basic email that you have copy paste 100 times. So having exclusive assets and opportunities can help too. Like you approach them, oh, we never released that trailer, but I want you to be the first one to release it. So it can be something that plays a lot. And of course, you also need to make their job easier. So have all the information and assets they need in the same place, like Google Drive, for example. Give them enough time to write and produce their content and provide review codes well in advance. Because I don't think anyone can do a great job when they're pressed in time. And when you're a small company with not a lot of influence, it's little attentions that can make a difference on how your game are treated by the outlets.
Yeah, no, those are really good points there, because I think sometimes when we approach this question of, shotgun approach in terms of very targeted, like rifle approach, to use some gun analogies here, it can create a much quite a different result. And plus with like quality too, I think we always focus on like the type of coverage. Oh, does this person really focus on RPGs or do they focus on everything? What's right there. But on top of that, you went into detail how even more so the targeting, well, the coverage, the type of coverage is important, but also the quality in terms of that relationship, how you're starting that relationship, what type of communication, like the exclusive content that you're sharing. Because what that does, I think in what you're saying here, is that actually doing the work to establish that type of relationship can give you an upper leg or some level of control in terms of how the story is being communicated. Whereas if you do the copy paste strategy, the shotgun approach, that's not really doing much. So people who can get that, they might just copy paste it too. And if, let's say that's not in line or anything else, it's not necessarily doing the best job at communicating what you think is the important story or the right form of communication to share. So I love how you further defined what that quality is, because again, I think we generally focus on the idea of what the coverage is, not how it's being covered. So I want to go into different things, more in line with some data and stuff. So things like you're reviewing historical and trending and even competitor coverage can probably produce a lot of valuable insights. But from all this type of, let's say, research or information we can dive into, what kind of learnings can be gleaned from this when creating effective PR campaigns? And how are we able to get that kind of information? But let's start from the top. What's important about doing this type of research and everything else and getting these insights so we can make effective decisions?
It's important because you learn what works, what doesn't work. And if you want to do a similar campaign later, you know what to not do and what to do. But otherwise, you also learn about people. Who's the best journalist to reach out for specific projects? Because they are people with specific tastes that resonate with their readers. So that's that. And you can also see on a more broader scale which outlet might be the right one, because generally kind of outlets also have their own audience that they gathered over years.
So I'm curious now, and I'd like to kind of present you this opportunity to kind of talk a little bit more too about, footprints, because there's a lot of information that this platform provides that I have seen firsthand, folks, too, that I think is extremely valuable and insightful, especially when doing this type of work. So with the still in line with this question, but focusing a little bit on a tool like Footprints, and I'm sure there's others out there too, but Footprints is a really great example of how this can be done. But what are like some of the insights and information that we can glean from a tool like Footprints?
From tools like Footprints, you can usually get UMVs, so it's the unique monthly visitors of a website, and that can be a great number to try to get a sense of how a website is important or not. But the thing is, you have to be careful because sometimes they have a lot of visitors, but their website itself, it's just a mismatch of copy-pasted articles from other websites.
Ah, okay.
That's the thing. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. And what we do have on Footprints, it's what we call the media score, which is us doing an algorithm to rate a website over 10, depending of its quality and not only its unique monthly visitors. So we get to know when a website is relevant or not, and also the quality of it and everything like that.
Okay. And a lot of this process in terms of coming up with the skill is based off of just past experiences that I'm sure that they're then like kind of set up and then programmed and built into the program too.
Yeah, it's experiences. We do take into account the UMVs, but that's not the only thing we take into account. There's also how the outlet is important in its own territory. For example, let's say you have a Brazilian website that you don't know because you never read anything from Brazil before. But the thing is they are rated 8 because it's one of the most important outlets in Brazil. It's just that you don't know.
Right. And that's a great point because depending on where you might be based, I mean, a lot of your content is probably going to be tailored to what your own language, to where you reside, whatever the case may be there. So you might not have that insight to something that's, especially if you know that, hey, we're making this type of game. It's very popular in these countries, but we might not necessarily be thinking in line of, hey, we might target that, but how else can you target that? And it sounds like, this tool can actually give you more insight. Like, wait, we never heard of this, but they give it an 8. Let's look into this further. And then that I think that in itself, something like that is a great example in terms of what are other ways to approach, opportunities. And that definitely showcases, I think, one of many other things. Why don't we talk a little bit quickly too about some of the other features of Footprints too, like kind of the competitor analysis? Because we talked a little bit about that, and you're like, yeah, you could always just search on Google, but like how does like, let's just generalize this though, but how are these? We talked about insights and everything. How can tools like Footprint kind of streamline that process so it's easier for whether it's an agency or a studio or whoever's using it?
So we have that tool that's called Super Search for context. It's basically you put, as Andrew said, like a Google kind of search, but it's about games and it's going to show you on a specific time frame how many articles were published between that time. And the thing is, you can use it for a lot of things, getting example of a successful campaign, for example, like you see a competitor or just another game having a very successful campaign because they communicated like this, like that. And you can see the coverage, how it was and what you need to be mindful of. Otherwise, you can also check how a company dealt with bad buzz, for example. I don't wish that on anyone, but that happens. So you can see, for example, there was a communication mishap on something that the players wanted, or something like that. And you just try to see how they dealt with that. And it can be a very nice case study for that.
Okay.
And otherwise, you can just see the kind of seasonality of news. It's going to be a lot now because of the PlayStation Showcase and some of the games and everything like that. But besides that, you can see the seasonality of events, of news, and everything like that, and you can schedule your plans so it fits that schedule, but you can still stand out. So yeah, a lot of use on marketing purpose for Super Search.
Yeah, and I love how you outline those things too, because there's a few things. I mean, we're here kind of focusing mostly on, PR campaigns and stuff, but even so, you revealed a lot of other helpful information in terms of, hey, how are these people really communicating their message? Or what went wrong in this form of communication. And then also checking out with seasonality of things. So let's say if there's a lot of attention going around certain times of the year, I mean, it's not just about, okay, how do we need to structure our PR campaign? It's also like, well, how do we structure our other marketing efforts and initiatives? So, and that's what I also found when I looked at the tool really interesting and helpful, because it's like, yeah, this is really tailored for PR, but there's so many other things and insights that glean from it. And on top of it, I mean, let's face it, folks, Google Alerts is a great tool, but it's not the best. I used it firsthand, and how many times do you put in an alert and they're like, oh, this is totally not even game related. So, and those types of things. And yeah, you can, if you know what you're doing, you can really tailor that search a little bit better in Google, but it can be very tedious to do that and understand the logistics and how Google works versus how you want Google to work. So
yes.
And that's another cool thing too, like you said earlier on, just how it's pre-filtered and all that other stuff to really tailor that information. Because for example, like Tunic, I mean, we can get lots of information about Tunic that aren't necessarily a game.
We had that issue with Tunic and Chicory, for example, because we do get some generalist website kind of results, because now some generalist website like BBC, for example, do have a tech side of it. So sometimes you're going to get some not game related news, but you can filter all that because our search engine, sorry, I always go French on that word. The search engine for footprints, you can take off some words to make sure that it's going to give you the right result. Like for Tunic, you're just going to write Tunic, but not clothes, shopping, and stuff like that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and again, these types of tools are extremely helpful. I have a background with SEO and Google ads and stuff and keywords, especially when you're trying to define things. It can be so tedious and stuff. To know that stuff is already done and well tailored is so helpful. And then last but not least, we talked a lot about different insights and everything else. I also wanted to quickly get a other sense and other things that are really helpful, because let's face it, whatever we're doing with PR, there's someone we need to report to in terms of the effectiveness of the campaigns, whether it's for our own information as like studio leaders or just a solo dev, all the way up to like, hey, if there's investors and they want to see kind of the results of things, what's typically done for providing those reports, and how can tools like Footprints simplify that process?
I'm going to talk about Footprints because I do know other tools, but not exactly how they do it. Mm-hmm. But for Footprints, basically, when you do a research on it for your project or your game, you can save the articles, and Footprints is going to make a report for you very easily. You just have to tag the articles you saved, what kind of time frame you want for the report, like let's say for a week between X and Y dates. And it's going to pull out a report on how many articles you got, the media score of it. We mentioned that earlier. How many sources this article comes from. So you know that it's not one website doing 20 articles, it's multiple. You have a chart on which day got the most articles published. and which languages were involved in that. I mean, there are a lot of information, and footprints do that, including graphs and everything. So it's easy to share because we know that a lot of PR task is to skim through all the list of articles and trying to say if it's relevant or not, then put it into a graph that you have to put to do on Excel or something like that. And that's very tedious. Like one of the thing that got mentioned a lot when I began to work on footprints is that a lot of PR people don't really mind getting the info by themselves, but building reports is a hassle.
Yes.
So yes, tools like Footprints do that very easily for you. You just have to put the name, the title of your report, the time frame, what you want to appear on the report, and that's done.
Yeah. So reporting, as Guy mentioned, is very tedious. I'm sure we're all related to that. Can relate to that. But with that said, too, it makes sense because let's say depending on who you're reporting it to, whether it's for your own purposes or reporting to others, having that information be easily accessible and looking at it in a format that can be easily digested, so therefore you can take action is super important. Because I know from working with clients too, and I'm looking at this from a different lens, not specifically PR, but let's say there's other efforts or there's other types of coverage that are happening that you don't even know about. These are certain ways to find out what that's happening, because time and time again, I've noticed so many times where people are like, hey, we just got this uptick in traffic on our Steam page and this, but where did it come from? And now they're going like back to like cross different platforms like Google Analytics and all stuff, trying to figure out where it was. But having a tool like this can make that very simple. And then what that does too, and especially with the PR campaign, you can look into that campaign, see what the results are in that time frame and everything, and probably look at maybe some of the residual impact it has had in other channels. And then you start connecting a lot more dots and saying, hey, look, we did this. Maybe if we do more of this in a different way, we can continue to get growth, great results, all these other factors that are occurring. So I love how, this tool does that, because, and this is why I'm such a fan of this, folks, it is simply because I love tools like this that not only make my job easier, but makes everybody's jobs easier in this industry. And that's really what it's doing. And I can see it from different ways and how it can be applied from a marketing perspective. Even though we're really just talking about PR today, there's so much more things like this, things like Footprints can do. But anyways, great insights there, because again, the key thing is making reports and information shareable, because if it's shareable, it means it's easy to digest. It means it's easy to act on. And I think that's like a really key factor there.
Yes. I mean, my explanation might be a little bit hard to understand, but the reports from Footprints are such visual things that if I don't show you, you're not going to really understand how it works. So I was struggling to explain because of that, because there are a lot of charts. It's that you can click and have different information. I mean, it's very visual and not a very. It's not something that you can easily describe.
Yes, no, you're right, but I think you described it the best you could. Like having information in a visual and simple format can make all the difference. I mean, not to go off on a quick little tangent here, but that's always been one of my main issues with how Steam reports information, is that visually it doesn't necessarily tell the whole story or how you're hitting certain milestones and stuff, because there's a lot of numbers there, but not necessarily different representations of visual formats to make things. Hey, they're making efforts to making strides to I'm sure improve upon that. Great. But in the past, that's always been my thing. And I think, ICO partners and with Footprints and there's a lot of other products out there too, doing similar things, that visual representation makes things a lot more actionable, easy to understand, easy to share. So that way everybody can get on the same page. So no, good call out there though too, because again, But in terms of how that looks and stuff, guys, you just might have to see it for yourself. So with that said, I want to kind of, we're approaching time here, and I would like to kind of close with any suggestions or tips that you might have, with what we discussed today.
So first suggestion, more of a tip. You need for PR to hype the outlets before you can hype the audience. Without going into spoiler territory, just produce enough assets to be able to show them and get them interested, and make, as I said, the information and assets easy to reach. So the journalists won't have to spend time Googling everything. You serve everything on the plate and you hype them. And by getting them interested, they're going to get their audience interested. So that's my first point of that. I would also say be sure of what you want to share and when. So work on a clear calendar and be sure of what you're going to share is newsworthy. As I said, PR people, journalists most of the time, have a lot of things going on. So you can go ahead and contact them if you have a new game announcement, for example. But do think twice about it if you want to share something that's mostly not going to be relevant for them. For example, I would say companies' information that's not tied to a game or something like that. So yeah, be mindful of their time and the information you send. And also, I said that before, but it's very important. You need to be prepared to be ignored because contacting outlets is often an exercise of patience. You just have to hang on and not give up. And it's going to build up slowly, but you'll have a contact list and it's going to get easier. That's especially true for indie games because we're not AAA is going like, oh, hello, we have this, bye, and people will write something about you. But yeah, indie games, we have to be patient and we need to hang on. And that's a tip I have for you.
Awesome. Well, 3 great ones right there. And just to go back real quick to what we were saying before in terms of like, hey, we're talking a lot about visualization and everything. In light of that, I want to just say, come back to the offer that we have or that you have prepared for our listeners, for anybody who is interested in Footprints, so they can actually see what we're talking about, how easy it is to use, and also the visual reporting and stuff that makes not just PR efforts, but honestly, all marketing efforts a lot easier. What is that offer and how do our listeners take advantage of it?
So we have a 15% discount code for you. That's going to be available. You can use it until end of July. It's IGM15. You use it and you can use it on any plans you want on Footprints. So it can be a monthly subscription if you just want to try it, or the yearly subscriptions. It's as you wish. But before that, in case you're on the fence on it, we also have a free trial of 30 days. So just go on the website, footprints.gg, and you can just drop an email to me or something like that.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate that. That's a big deal and makes all the difference. So folks, if you are interested, the website footprints.gg. Look at the plans. If there's any that you're like, hey, let's do this, let's sign up. It's just IGM15 for the coupon code. Make sure you applied that. But if not, like Guy, you said, if you're on the fence, there is a trial period. And is that like full access to all the features? It's just a certain time period?
Yes. You have all the features. It's just that you can only do one report.
Okay.
And on the super search historical data, you'll only have 1 month of historical data when you search.
Opposed to like a bigger window. Got it. Okay. But still, super helpful information and gives you everything that you need to, if you are on the fence, to really make that decision. So again, Guy, can't thank you enough for that. And you mentioned too, like, yeah, you can sign up on the website, or if you have other questions, like people can reach out. What are great ways to reach out to you, either directly, social media? What are ways that people can connect?
You can send an email to me directly. It's gai@icopartners.com, GA-yi@icopartners.com. Social media, you can reach me out there too, even though it's a concentration of memes, but it's going to be fine. It's at Robotigame, so ROBOTIGAME. And yeah, that's pretty much it if you want to drop a line or something.
Excellent. Well, again, can't thank you enough for sharing these great insights about how to kind of like go about and maximizing your PR campaigns and everything else that you shared with us today, and especially that offer. So, Guy, again, thanks for your time, for being on the show today. It was great having you.
Thanks for having me. It was great being here.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.